I have a ridiculous amount of data. And what I'm doing for that is I'm contextualizing quantitative analyses of their performances within the comments that they make, and also information about their demographic, pedagogical, and professional backgrounds to see, for example, why is it that there is such an extraordinary amount of diversity within people's interpretations?
Welcome back to the All the Stops podcast. It's episode 25, and my Bernese mountain dog is lying right outside the doors of the studio, making a little whimpering, whining sound. So if you hear that, just excuse it. And in the meantime, I'm going to finish this intro as soon as I can because she needs supper. So I'll be quick here. I will tell you that if I were to read Katelyn Emerson's entire biography, it would probably be the running time of a typical episode, and we're going to get into it a little bit, talking about her illustrious performance career. But the main thrust of it today is kind of getting to know the organs of different regions. Katelyn is a great performer and an academic, but she has lived and spent significant time in the organ scenes in France, in Germany, in the United Kingdom, and of course the United States as well. And so we have an interesting discussion where we kind of get into it. You might think that, well, there's American style organ stuff and there's European style stuff, but it's not just country to country. It's even like region, sub-region within a country. We talked about it a little bit, how organs in southern Germany could in some ways have more similarities to France than they might to northern German organs, which might be more similar to Scandinavia. And of course, there's crazy overlap. One of the things that's really cool is that Katelyn is currently a PhD candidate at the University of Cambridge's Center for Music and Science. And she has a really innovative project where she's got a ton of data and is looking for patterns in how people play. She has something like 30 organists with extensive interviews, and I'll let her explain it a little bit better, but it's interesting to hear some of the patterns they found and some of the patterns they have not found that they might have expected to find. So really fascinating conversations. And before we get into it, I just want to remind you, if you have flexibility in your budget, patreon.com/allthestopsmedia. We would welcome anything that you're able to contribute. We have a standard, a very inexpensive membership that gets you extra bonus content and ad-free versions of the show. And I will say, I just put up another piece of bonus content, and so there's going to be more of that coming your way. Anyhow, if you can do that, that would be great. If not, just like and subscribe and share and all that good stuff on whatever podcast service you're using. Subscribe on Spotify. That really helps the show. Show continues to grow, and thank you to those of you who have jumped on Patreon and have started to support this independent project. Without further ado, it's Katelyn Emerson. Katelyn Emerson, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Wes?
I am very well. I'm really excited to have you on. We have been friends for a long time. And one cool thing about us is that we went to the same school and our siblings went to the same other school. And as I recall, we have about the same age gap with the siblings, and we're both New Englanders.
Exactly. We have way too much in common, including having lived on the same hallway during our first overlapped year at Oberlin.
Yeah, no hate, but that was not the best dormitory I've ever experienced. I try to forget old South dorm at Oberlin.
The conservatory was worth it, but we won't talk about the living accommodation.
Yeah, I think that's right. So it's actually, speaking of living accommodations, for video viewers, you have precisely nothing behind you because you're moving out like tomorrow or something.
Exactly. So I've been living in these rooms. I'm currently finishing up my PhD at the University of Cambridge, and in 48 hours, I'm moving out of these rooms. So I have all of, a photograph and 3 books behind me. So I promise I'm not in a hotel room, and I promise I do also have clutter normally, but I'm exceptionally minimalistic today. I'm sure Marie Kondo would be very impressed.
Yes, and minimalism is a value for you because you have lived all over the place. You have lived in Germany, you have lived in France and the UK, of course, the United States. And I kind of want to zoom in there because you've had an experience that a lot of organists don't get, where you are really immersed in the organ style of different countries. People might think, oh, there's American stuff and there's European stuff. but it really couldn't be further from the truth. Can you just kind of give us a little bit of an overview? What does it feel like to be in the organ scene in France? You're in Toulouse, right?
Yes, I was.
So France versus Germany. I mean, how different is it?
Well, we have several hundred years worth of organ history. So, of course, each style of instrument grew up within its own cultural, social, musical realm. It was kind of the instruments, the builders, the people playing them were breathing the water, eating the cheese, drinking the wine, eating the food. So all of these instruments are vastly different. Organs vary in numbers of keys on the different manuals, numbers of pedals, whether or not there are pedals at all, if there are any kinds of playing aids. So can you change stops really quickly, or do you have to take your hands off the keyboard in order to do that? And because of these differences in how we interact with making the actual sounds, the repertoire also is hugely different. So, one of the huge benefits of being able to move around, being able to live and immerse yourselves in these different styles, is to get to know the affordances and the constraints of the instruments, and then how people today, in a completely different time period than when many of these instruments were built, are using them and acclimating themselves to these instruments, and how the repertoire has grown since maybe these instruments were built, if they were built maybe 3 to 500 years ago, or how modern instruments in each of these places are really changing things for the players as well as for audiences as well. So it's been so enriching to be able to live in each of these places and to try and soak up all of these different interactions, historical and contemporary, that we get to have with these instruments. And I love traveling around, living in different places, because you really get to know them in such a different way than if you're turning up and getting to know an instrument in 2 days, which of course I also love doing. But having been able to acclimate myself for longer periods of time, it actually means that I can have this mental plasticity, physical plasticity, to just be able to sink my teeth into an unfamiliar instrument a little bit more, because I have so much profound familiarity with such a variety of instruments, and I can help with my teaching as well to introduce students to the concepts that I'm talking about now.
Let's start with France. You know, we have listeners who are nerds. No offense, listeners. People who know a lot about organs, but we also have listeners who don't know much about organs specifically, but who are interested. And will you just give us a little sense? What would someone expect to see on a French organ? We could maybe talk about French Romantic instruments. You can go nerdy if you want.
So, French Romantic instruments, we're talking about, for example, the 19th century. This was the heyday of Romantic style, when we were looking for a little bit more heart in our instruments, a little more warmth, when we were looking at the orchestra for inspiration. The organ started to imitate the orchestra. We started to have things like oboes, which we did have a little bit earlier, but we had oboes, trumpets, string sounds. All of these sorts of orchestral instruments began to appear on organs. And concurrently, we had organ symphonies. Around the same time in England, so sorry, jumping across the channel for a quick second, they were also looking orchestrally, and they were bringing the orchestra to the people. So going to opera or going to symphony was too expensive for the common person. So the organist would go to opera and go to symphony. They would understand the music, they would hear it, they would transcribe it, and they would play it on the organ. So you could pay your penny to come and hear a town hall organist play whatever was popular for the symphony at the time. So in France, there was a little bit of a different relationship with it, but they were also looking at the orchestra for inspiration. So we're trying to see some of these warmer textures. We're looking at players who are playing perhaps with more rubato, with a little more flexibility, with this kind of more warmth and heart. And of course, as players, when you're sinking your teeth into that kind of an instrument, you really get to luxuriate in some of these warmer sounds and in the wonderful acoustics that we have there. So that is such a treat.
Gosh, the acoustics are incredible too. It's an amazing marriage of organ and room. And then in Germany, you were in southern Germany. You were in Stuttgart, as I recall.
I was with gap years between all of these, during which I got to schlep all of my things back across the pond and then return to another country, which was great
Oh
fun.
my
Highly
gosh!
recommend.
Oh my gosh! So, you studied with Ludger Lohmann, right, in Stuttgart there, and you experienced a wide variety of German instruments. But of course, you'd played them before, but you got to spend extended time and really figure that whole thing out in an intuitive way. Tell people like what types of things might you expect to see from German organs?
So, of course, Germany wasn't unified until fairly recent history, and I won't get too far into the political history there, but Germany was for a long time a collection of different city states, and these different city states all had different kinds of religions that were going on. For example, in the south of Germany, we had a lot more Catholicism, and in the north of Germany, we had a bit more of the Reformation and Lutheranism going on. As a result, we had different music going on in different churches, and also different music going on in the concert halls. People had different tastes, and a lot of that sometimes would align with the church music. Different instruments grew up. Alongside this. So there's a lot more close relationships, perhaps with Scandinavia and northern Germany, and with southern Europe, Italy, France, and Austria, and southern Germany. As they shared religion, they might share some building styles. But one of the extraordinary things, of course, in being in Germany and being able to travel around Germany is to walk in the footsteps of history. So being able to visit some of the places that Bach visited, being able to get to know instruments that, for example, if you've heard of Reger, instruments that Reger was writing for, Reupke, all of these extraordinary things. For example, I'd mentioned Reger and Reupke just there. To play the instruments that they were actually writing for, you suddenly realize that the level of pistons and the level of detail that we think of when we're trying to orchestrate these incredible chorale fantasies, or the amazing, most famous Reupke, the 94 Psalm, you suddenly realize that we can get very OCD to an extent that they were incapable of doing at that time. And should that change how we play it today? That's questions that we need to be thinking about. We don't have to find the right answer. There is no right answer, but it makes it really relevant for how we interact with these historic instruments, how they could interact with them, and then what should we take from that when we play instruments today?
That's fascinating. People always ask me like, why did you go to Germany and why did you study there? And I've tried to say something to the effect of, well, I wanted to learn this kind of music, but being on the actual instruments in the actual rooms is instructive. I think that example you just gave of Reger and Reupke, where they could just kick a wheel, basically. They had this like the Rollschweller, and they could just push their foot up and down on it, and it would add all these stops mechanically and then take them away. And would you describe it as almost this like hyper focused, like OCD kind of thing when we're setting our pistons? And it's like, well, maybe that maybe you need to be in the music more and just don't worry about it as much. Just focus on the music. That's a really fascinating way of describing it. I want to ask you before our first break, if you had to pick an adjective to describe German organs, to describe French organs, and to describe English organs, what would it be?
Does it have to be an adjective?
Um, no. Oh, you know what? It could be a food item. Could be a noun. You could pick.
How
You
did you
could say
know?
wine, wine, beer, and gin.
Yes, exactly. You've given me them. No, and again, I already mentioned this thing of different regional trends and different era trends. So to encompass the complexity of these cultures with just a single word, I think would be more what I would have done before I did any of this traveling. I think now that I've been and lived in each of these places, it's so complex, it's so nuanced. To try and summarize them with a single term is an incredible challenge. And perhaps by the end of my life, I'll be able to do that, with a charming word that encapsulates the complexity. But I think wine, beer, and gin actually is a really interesting idea because they are of a similar nature. They are all, a certain kind of beverage. We won't get into alcohol if people are pro prohibition or anything like that, but there's a difference there, and yet there within each of those there's so much subtlety and there's so much variety of what can go on with different flavors and nuances and eras and tastes. So I think that's actually encapsulated it perfectly, Wes.
A leading question. We'll be right back. We're going to take our first break. Stay with us.
Hey, Andrew, do you think it's weird that we're advertising a website and podcast about board games on a podcast that's about the organ?
Well, I get how you can get there, Anitra, but the truth is, as you know, there are board games for just about everything these days.
That's true. In the last 5 years, we've seen Luthier, which is a board game about making violins, Ovation, which is a game about becoming a classical composer, and even Lacrimosa, a game about one of the world's most famous composers, Mozart, my favorite.
And if you like modern music, there's even games like Hi-Fi, or Rock Hard 1977, and even Record, which is a game about playing the guitar.
6 games all about music that we listed in the last 10 seconds. We're guessing most folks out there have never heard of any of them.
It is a hard problem, but it's also exactly why We're here to help people find games about the topics they care about.
We're Anitra and Andrew, married parents of 3, and we've been talking about board games on the internet for over a decade.
We usually talk about how it's going playing games with the kids in our lives and hopefully helping you play games with the kids in yours. Do they have a subject in school that they're really struggling with? There's probably a game about that. Just ask.
Find the Family Gamers podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and check out our reviews at thefamilygamers.com. You can also find us on social media at FamilyGamersAA.
So, in between those practice sessions, make sure to play games with your kids.
I want to know if you would consider yourself to be a specialist in any particular type of music, or if you've studied so many different styles so intensely, it's almost like you're a specialist in many different types of repertoire. Is there one that you kind of consider closest to your heart?
I think because the instruments are so varied, I have actively tried to not specialize because I take so much joy sometimes in playing a two-manual mechanical action organ in a concert with, music by Handel and Bach and Muffat and, exploring split sharp keys and short octaves. But then I also love going and playing. I just played in Helsinki in the Musikkasalo, the new Riga organ there, a little over a year ago, and that's a hyper organ, so it can do extended techniques, it can do sustain, it can use MIDI, it can you can change pitch, you can add vibrato at different speeds. I have not actually gotten too far into music that's been written for instruments like that because you need an organ like that around to experiment with, and currently there are none in Cambridge and none in
Uh-huh.
most places that I frequent. So there are instruments that I or styles that I haven't necessarily got into. I'm happy to say there are fairly few, mostly because of lack of opportunity and lack of access. But it's one of the amazing things that you can turn up and discover a new aspect of an instrument, and that can cause you to completely rethink how you're playing a particular piece. And I played Longwood several years ago, and I played the Liszt Adnos there. So being able to orchestrate it on that organ and with those kinds of flavored American sounds makes an entirely different piece and makes you approach it with different techniques, different articulations, rubato, different kinds of overall interpretation approaches. So I love being able to explore different styles and to go back to old styles and reconceive them on new instruments, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, and you're really getting at the heart of what it is to be an organist in some sense here. We've been fortunate to have some really great performers on the show, and one question I've asked a couple of people is if there's a balance of bringing the music you want to play to an instrument, or going to an instrument and trying to bring the music that that instrument wants to sing. So if we can sort of see that kind of spectrum, would you see yourself falling in that latter category more?
I have been known to adjust a program because I've turned up and been surprised by how well an organ was able to do a piece that I didn't expect. I
Huh.
think that's a wonderful thing when you turn up to a German romantic instrument and you say, huh, I think Bairstow might work very well here. Or you're playing in England and you go, actually, I'd really like to play some Spelink. I think it will balance out the program really well. I tried to do that fairly rarely because I have enough experience to know when I can push boundaries, based on the stop list, based on the builder, based on the era. But I think it's so much fun to kind of adjust based on the aural and tactile feedback you're getting from the instrument. One thing at the moment, I'm finishing up my PhD, and part of that PhD has been talking to expert interpreters, organists, about their approaches to instruments, and I've seen exactly what you're talking about. Um, of course, people do not fall into two separate camps, but people can tend to say, I have a very strong interpretation of this piece that I want to figure out how to make happen on this instrument. And then there are people who might fall towards the other end of the spectrum where they say, my job is to respond to how the instrument wants me to interpret this piece. And I find that so interesting that our colleagues and friends do fall in, I hesitate to say fall into these two camps, but that there do seem to be somewhat two approaches to this. And whether or not it actually comes out in the wash in their playing is a whole nother question, because they all sound amazing. So what does that actually mean for how they're approaching the instruments?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a fascinating idea. You think about, we talked about French Romantic instruments earlier and how they were trying to reflect the orchestra, but uh, Aristide Cavaillé-Coll was known to keep older pipework often from these old, Clicquot instruments and things, and keep some of that stuff in the organ. So he's telling us that was a value to him as the aesthetic creator of this kind of instrument, and that makes you think, oh, interesting, like what does that mean for me as a performer? And I suppose it can give you a sense of license to try to do more stuff than you might if you were being really, really extreme about it. What are some of the, you mentioned a few places you'd played and had cool experiences, but I want to explore that further. Longwood Gardens, and then Helsinki. What are some other concerts you've played where you felt like you had a really like inspiring time as the performer, where the instrument itself kind of surprised you, or where the instrument just was the perfect exact setting of what you were trying to do musically?
That is such a difficult and very good question. I think someone told me several years ago that the thing to remember as a performer is that the best organ in the world is the one you're playing right now. And I
Ah,
think I took that very much to heart because I feel like if you haven't made friends with the instrument, even if you arrive, usually I like to arrive, then have a practice day, and then have concert day. So day one, I meet the organ. I've just arrived. I haven't slept yet. Usually really tired, and we don't like each other. We don't get on. We don't see eye to eye. And then day two, we start understanding each other. I start being able to acclimate to it. Maybe it kind of meets me halfway. And then the third day, concert day, we're usually best friends. So I'm lucky that it's very rare for me to not feel as though I understand and get along with an instrument on the concert day. Um, but um, I have had a lot of fun with instruments that kind of make me sit up and listen. So a year ago, I was able to play a new orgue de facto instrument at Brasenose College in Oxford, and it's very unstable wind. And that was an instrument where if I didn't listen and if I didn't adjust particularly pedal articulation and if I didn't round the edges of transitions between sections, the wind would spit at me, and
hmm.
that made it extremely challenging. So I could have taken it as, oh, I don't like this because I'm having to change so much, but it was actually quite fun to have to acclimate and to have to
Hmm.
find ways to make an instrument like that sound as good as it possibly could. I love challenges. I also love instruments. I played at the concert hall in Madrid.
Hmm.
Gorgeous instrument there, much more kind of neo baroque. And that one, I just felt like I could just sit down and play. And you have overnight practice time, 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. or something like that. So you're so tired by the end of it that you're just like, great, this is fine. And it was just such a blast to just sit down and be able to play that instrument and to have a blast and to kind of enjoy the sharp edges of that organ. So it's so much fun to be able to really get to know these instruments and to change myself around them. If that makes sense.
Let's talk about your career more as a performer. We have so many elements of your career to talk about. There's the kind of, as Katelyn the academic, and we can certainly discuss that. But let's stick with Katelyn the performer now. The organ is having a moment, uh, like a popular moment. The organ has ebbs and flows over the years, and I think the 1920s. You think about organ incredibly popular, and you think through the 20th century, we get to the place where there are two organists with stars in the Hollywood Walk of Fame, right? And it's like everyone knows, new E. Power Biggs and Virgil Fox, and then there was a sense when we were kids that the organ was kind of flagging a little bit, and now, like we've talked about on the show before, but I anecdotally there are always way more people at recitals. Every recital I play, surprisingly full, or they'll have to print more programs or whatever. And a lot of my colleagues report that there are people who are playing a wide variety of music. There are people who are playing popular music. There are people who are playing really niche pieces. But I want to ask you, as a performer, now that more people are kind of open to the organ and are wanting to come to concerts, what do you want people to engage with at at a concert where you're playing really high level music, pairing the instrument and the music? It's brainy. It is. Like you're not playing concerts where you're trying to just kind of only show off the instrument. What do you want people to encounter, even if they haven't really studied 800 years of organ repertoire?
Nobody needs to study 800 years of organ repertoire, Wes. Also, I want to say you're just amazing. So, I mean, people are turning up to your concerts because you're just fabulous and everybody wants to hear you. It's so exciting what you're doing. I am so full of admiration. And I can say I've known you from so many years ago, when you were already a star. And it's just amazing to see you just shine and shine. So it's so much fun.
Liz, you're very kind. Back to
I'll
you,
stop
Katelyn.
making you blush.
Back
Sorry.
to you. Yeah, okay,
I'll
back to you.
stop fangirling. No, I think what's so much fun is, as you say, yeah, okay, nerds, we have 800 years worth of music. So we get to look through history and we get coming back to this idea of Kabaya taking pipes that were already there from Clicquot and from his previous colleagues. Nothing we do happens in a void, right? We are building, we are standing on the shoulders of giants. We are building on the incredible things that have come before. We're building on what happened in the 1920s. We're building on maybe the historically informed performance peak that was happening even that era when maybe popularity in the organ was flagging a little bit. We are all some kind of combination of our own personal experiences and of all of the knowledge and history and expertise that has come before us. So I feel like my job in a recital program is to meet the contemporary listeners, including myself, wherever we are, and maybe hopefully to play something that we will all recognize, whether that something is a very different thing for each of us. Maybe it's a melody, maybe it's a certain kind of texture, maybe it's kind of a snippet of harmony. But also to introduce something that's a little bit less familiar that maybe we'll like, and maybe even to introduce something that we don't like as much and we don't have to listen to as much, but to kind of have a little bit of this, just this little journey through the instrument, through history, through culture, and to kind of just meet us all wherever we are. We don't have to like every moment of everything. I i probably am not happy with every moment in a recital, um but to be able to sit there and to kind of let ourselves go for a moment and to be immersed in this live experience of hearing sound and in you know and physicality of feeling yourself be present there. In my case, I'm interacting physically with the instrument, of sight, of enjoying maybe the room, even people watching. There's so many senses that are coming together in these experiences that I feel like it can be a moment of time outside of normal time. And I love that. And I hope very much that it can also be an emotional journey. So we're also feeling that introspection, being able to kind of experience it where we are. There's I play several pieces frequently. So the VR Naiads, you will know that from Oberlin. I've had people tell
Sorry,
me that it's not.
I'm gonna jump in here. That's one of the hardest pieces I've ever heard in my life, and
It's just
I
B
feel
major
like
scales.
I feel like you play it all the time, and it's always perfect. And I just, if you don't know the piece, if you're listening, just go on Spotify and listen to the Naiads. Just search that; it'll come up, and it's just like whirls of just like whirling dervishes of sound floating around. It's a crazy piece. But anyhow, continue.
So Louis Vuitton, when he was writing that piece, he was actually writing. It's titled "Water Nymphs," right? So you have water nymphs, kind of as you say, whirling around, maybe over water, over lily pads, anything like that. Think Monet and just go with it. I've also had people listen to it and say, "Oh, it sounds like spiders to me." I don't think it sounds like spiders at all, but that was their experience. So I guess what I'm trying to get back to with the concert experience is it's not about trying to have the same experience as everybody else in the room, because your experiences are building on your own history. So to be able to turn up, have your experience, to enjoy it, hopefully, and then to come back and have another experience is really my goal. And I hope to connect with each person in the audience, both during and after the program, and to kind of have this shared experience that is so unique and also so global.
Do you speak with your audience in between, or do you kind of try to leave the music to speak for itself?
I Unless people request that I don't, I almost always speak, because I think that, again, this idea of everybody's coming at it from different angles. I think, first of all, to break down this barrier of, oh, I am the performer who will sit in the loft and never speak again. As you can tell, I probably talk too much and tend to smile and bounce around a little bit. So I like to chat with people and you don't want to talk for too long because people are there to hear music, but to give, especially people who may not know the piece or may not have been to an organ concert before, to give them a reason why I love this piece, or a little bit of the context and this history, this kind of social or cultural or political history of the piece, to give us all something to hold on to, something that I really like, in this particular piece, or various things to just pay attention to as we go through it.
We've got to take our final break. We'll be right back. Today's episode is brought to you in part by Ortloff Organ Company. With instruments from coast to coast, Ortloff Organ Company has gained a strong national reputation for new pipe organs built with meticulous attention to detail, placing the accompaniment of singing first and foremost. Based in Greater Boston, Massachusetts, their thoughtful restoration work, specifically of Skinner and Wurlitzer organs, has also gained high praise. Visit ortlofforgan.com to see their current, past, and upcoming work, and following them on Facebook and Instagram for frequent updates on what's happening in the shop. ortlofforgan.com. Today's episode is brought to you in part by today's episode, the All the Stops podcast on Patreon, where you can go on for a small subscription fee, get an ad-free version of the show, as well as some bonus content coming soon, and support the back-end costs of making this show possible. If you love what we do here, we would love it if you would consider throwing a couple of bucks our way and supporting these great conversations about the pipe organ and how it works and who plays it and all that good stuff. If you're listening, you know why you're listening. Anyway, patreon.com/allthestopsmedia. Throw a couple bucks our way, it would help a lot. Thank you for listening to the show, and thanks for supporting what we're doing. It's time to talk about what you do when you're not performing, but when you're writing and you're researching. Tell us a little bit about your project right now.
Well, if your listeners want to tune out, don't ask a PhD candidate what they want to talk about, because that's always a very dangerous thing to do. So in my PhD, because of my background as a performer and an interpreter, what I did was I invited 30 concert organists to Cambridge and audio, video, and MIDI recorded them on 2 organs here in Cambridge. One is an electro-pneumatic action, so an instrument that uses electric um, things to connect the key strike to the pipe opening, and a mechanical action organ where it's all mechanically done and you can technically kind of control things a little bit more. You can slowly open and slowly close the pipes. And then I interviewed them for upwards of 3 hours. So I have a ridiculous amount of data. And what I'm doing for that is I'm contextualizing quantitative analyses of their performances within the comments that they make, and also information about their demographic, pedagogical, and professional backgrounds, to see, for example, why is it that there is such an extraordinary amount of diversity within people's interpretations? How much of that is coming from really the direct, I want to play it this way? How much of it might be linked to the fact that you studied in a particular place, that you may speak a particular language, that you're of a certain generation? I'm really interested in how this kind of unique interpretive quality comes to be. And of course, in a data set of 30, you're not going to come to any complete conclusions, but you can start to kind of pick away at these tendencies and see how much rich variety there is between these players. And I'm having so much fun doing that.
30 is, first of all, what a cool project. 30 is not insignificant. I mean, I would think that would be the biggest sample size of anything like this that's ever been done. Can you tell us, I know you haven't, it's not published yet, but can you tell us how far afield, are you various countries, and who is your youngest, who's your oldest, that kind of thing?
Sure. So each of them were able to fill out a bespoke form giving me permission whether or not I could share their names and things related to PhD. So any names or information that I share, they very kindly allowed me to include. So the youngest is actually Charles Francis, who's currently at Eastman and also, all over the place, studying and playing. He's fabulous. And then the eldest is actually Luca Lomond, so a former teacher of mine. So that was fabulous to have. So there we already have someone from the UK studying in the US, but we also have a German who's spent most of his academic career in Germany. We also have several people from France, somebody who grew up in Australia and eventually landed in France as well, a couple of people from South Korea, one person from China. So we have a person from Italy, someone from Sweden. So it's a nice variety of people. And of course, we have 15 native English speakers, including US, Canada, and Britain. So we have a nice variety, but also quite a bit on the English speaking side. So it's Yeah, 30 is a lot for the qualitative section, for the interviews, but actually for quantitative analyses, it would be so nice to have 200 organists to be able to run numeric analyses. But I have to say, it is an overwhelming amount of data. So I'm really focusing on very specific strategies for the PhD, and then I'll be able to do other sorts of more global analyses after.
Yeah, what surprised you from all of this work? Is there anything that popped up that you thought, oh, I didn't account for this?
What is so cool is that an analysis that we just ran last week, we were looking for essentially global trends to see if, for example, the French speakers would tend to do this thing and the English would do another. What is so wonderful about it is that there were no trends, not in that particular analysis. People were all over the map because they were interpreting it the way that they wanted. It's not something that it's immediately attributable to some kind of thing like a passport. I love that there were there was too much variety for people to apparently center on. What we were looking at was specifically like a timing analysis or an
Hmm.
articulation analysis of just the opening of a piece, and it wasn't immediately evident that people were attributing, able to be attributed to one particular thing. So I think that richness, again, we're going back to the first segment, this idea of nuance and variety and complexity comes back to the players as well. There's such a rich amount of individuality.
Wow, this is fascinating, and I imagine, I mean, in some ways, a Southern German might have more in common with a French organist, and a Northern German organist might have more in common with a Swedish or Danish organist. I mean, it's
Absolutely. And then if the Swedish person studied in France or Germany, where would that go as well?
yeah,
And yeah, it's
right.
hugely complex. I think the French players tended to study in France, so we might have a little bit more of a tendency there. But the German and the English and the American and such all tended to study everywhere. So we have a huge amount of kind of overlap of influences.
You've been so generous with your time today as you make, your final move out and wrapping up your work. So thank you for that. I have two questions before we wrap up. The first one I want to ask you is, what's the end game, so to speak, for Katelyn Emerson? If you kind of, fast forward a few years, you've played a zillion more concerts, you've finished your PhD. Where would you see yourself professionally 5 or 10 years?
Well, a couple of cliche things that I will often say. The first one is my crystal ball broke a while ago, so can't reference that. The second one goes back to Oberlin. If you remember David Brightman, who taught and I think still teaches forte piano and headed up the historically informed performance faculty there. I remember that I'd graduated from Oberlin and I went back to visit. I'd gone off to France and I'd ended up at a church job back in Boston and then was going off to Germany. And we had a coffee these couple of years after I graduated. And he sat back here after hearing everything that I was doing. He goes, I remember when you had this very clear path, and I'm so glad that none of it's come to pass. And I took that just very much to heart, of this idea of the world is changing so fast. As you say, the interest in organ is ebbing and flowing and thankfully coming back up more than anything else. Interest in certain types of teaching is changing. Interest in looking outside our own borders for musical influences, for inspiration, for all of this. I hope that we use music and use pedagogy and use research to create more connection more than anything else. And I hope that in my years on this earth, I will be able to help to do that, whether it's through concerts, whether it's through writing, whether it's through teaching, or through whatever opportunities really come to fit wherever my directions are. I have some really exciting research opportunities that are coming up. So that seems like it will be a part of my career in the long term, which is super exciting. Concerts are amazingly still energetic, still coming in, and I'm still loving traveling for them. And I have I have about a dozen students, so it seems like I am very lucky to be exactly where I've always wanted to be. And that will change because where I will want to be will change as well. But I look forward to seeing what directions it leads me.
I was gonna say, I asked the question and I thought, it might be Endgame might be exactly right now. You've already
I'm
passed the
done.
end game, I think. You
No, no, I hope not. No, I mean, it's I look forward to I don't look forward to growing up, getting older,
Yeah.
but at the same time it's much better than the alternative. So I look forward to all the next end games.
This leads really well into my second question, the last question, which is we have some young listeners and some young people who are interested in the organ or music in general. And I want to, you are in a place that a lot of people might aspire to be. And so, what would you tell a young person who's interested in the organ? What would you tell them now that you wish somebody had told you by way of encouragement or a little bit of wisdom?
It's always so difficult because, again, this idea of everybody coming from their own experiences. I was extremely lucky to have extraordinary mentors throughout. So, the first thing I would tell them is find the helpers, find the people who will support you and who will not just see the good in you, but also encourage you to improve the good to being the best you can possibly be, and who can also give you the tools to improve on maybe things that aren't quite as strong. You will never regret work put in to something, because even if you don't go in the direction that you think you're going with whatever thing you're working for, there might be another even better option that you'll be able to pivot towards because of the hard work that you've done. I have had to learn so many new skills because of this silly PhD of mine, including coding, and those skills have come in handy, even if I look forward to not having to use most of them as intensively. But to confirm for myself that I can learn a lot of these things was huge. And to not feel discouraged when it doesn't go right the first few times. Because it is so hard to be your own cheerleader. So if you find that you're struggling to be your own cheerleader, find somebody else who can just prop you up enough so you can keep going and find the next moment of yay.
I love that. Katelyn, you've been so generous with your time. Thank you. Where can people go to stay apprised of your concerts? Find one in the country nearest to them.
My website, KatelynEmerson.com, is always updated, and also you can always contact me through that resource as well. I'm quite easy to get in touch with if there's any questions, or especially young organists or people aspiring to live out of a suitcase. Don't hesitate to get in touch.
Katelyn, thanks for being with us today. All the Stops podcast is a product and trademark of All the Stops Media LLC and is recorded and produced by me, Wesley Hall. The music is written and recorded by me too. Copyright 2026, all rights reserved. Thanks for listening.